Tonight, we have 9 stories. From a woman in a surgical mask, a few outdoor stories, a tale from a coroner, and more. This lineup is full of surprises and plenty to be terrified about. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Me, being a 22-year-old alcoholic, I tend to hallucinate. The effects of alcohol can make my mind witness all sorts of things, some that seem completely unreal. Being an alcoholic, I never believed anything I saw while being hammered. I would give an example, but some are too embarrassing to share. I became an alcoholic when I became 21. On my birthday, I was immediately wired to drinking. I went to bars almost every Friday. Even though I'm an alcoholic, I still drink responsibly. But after one Friday night, I stopped drinking. The experience just made a spot in my brain click, and presently, will never drink a single sip of alcohol. I woke up after passing out on the bar counter. People still partying on the dance floor 10 feet away from the bar. The bartender stands in front of me on the opposite side of the counter. Boy, rough night, huh? The bartender gives a chuckle. I slowly lift myself up to look at the bartender. He was a stereotypical bartender, twirly mustache and bushy goatee. I slide my empty cup to the side and look back up, my eyes dilated. When I say responsible drinker, I mean I won't get a DWI or DUI. I may be hammered, but I still feel fear. Yeah, I slurred. I stumble out of my chair, and in my drunken mind, I plan to walk a block to my house and come back tomorrow to retrieve my keys and car. I give a little wave goodbye to the bartender and start to walk away from the bar counter, stumbling with every step. About 6 minutes, I finally get my equilibrium to walk normally. Even if I am piss drunk, I can still have the ability to gain my equilibrium and walk normally. I push the entrance door of the bar and step out into the cold night. Every breath I take becomes vaporized as I chatter my teeth. I start my walk home, with my hand holding myself up with the embankments of buildings. A week ago, I twisted my ankle after tripping on one of my morning runs. Tripping on a poorly placed sidewalk slab. Twisting my ankle obviously altered the way of walking. I started my morning runs ever since my brother, to me, was diagnosed with cancer in his lungs. Since his diagnosis, I fell into a hole of worrisome. I love my brother to death. We played on the same football team in school, had the same interests for sports, and just got along really well. When a friend of mine got me into morning runs, it released my stress and worrisome. Since it released all my pressure I keep inside me, I started to run every morning, either alone or with a friend. Now what used to be stress is now hope for my brother. My hand continues to help me walk. As I get colder and colder by the minute, my breathing is more vaporized like I was smoking cigarettes, even though I never smoked. It was getting so cold that I slumped on the sidewalk next to an alleyway as my breathing gets heavier. I roll on my side to face the alleyway. Nothing but a dumpster and trash bags. I fell next to a 7-Eleven, brightly lighting my area, but I fell by an area nobody could see me from the inside. So I laid there staring down the empty alleyway that leads to possibly nowhere. I continue to gain strength to pick myself up and walk home. I laid there for about 10 minutes, and I finally gained my strength to pick myself up. Onward I continued home, until I hear footsteps. Footsteps from high heels. It was coming from the alleyway. My hammered self turned towards the alley, and my blurred vision gave me an outline of a broad woman. My vision starts to clear up. The woman was broad, wearing a black leather trench coat and surgical mask, with beautiful, long black hair, and holding a pair of tailor shears. She was walking towards my direction slowly, as she stared me down like I was the food of a beast. In my drunken stupor, I walked towards the woman. In the back of my hammered mind, I knew it was a hallucination. Hey, ma'am. Lovely weather. I slurred my question, but she just stood there staring at me. I walked towards the woman, which was so idiotic of me to do. I stumbled in front of her and gave her a little wave, saying hello to the woman. She grabbed my arm tightly and picked me up, placing me on my feet. I look up to her eyes, still staring me down like prey. At this moment, the fear started to build up. Drunk me finally became conscious of my well-being. "Am I beautiful?" she asked in a monotone voice. Drunk me starts to chuckle a little. "Ma'am, you're beautiful." I slurred more of my words. I look at the woman, and with one of her hands, she starts to peel off her surgical mask. When she peeled the mask off her face, it made the most disturbing sound of crunching. What she was hiding behind her mouth, she had slits from ear to ear. It was an eerie, permanent smile. Ma'am? Do you want me to call an ambulance?" I asked, with a slightly more clear voice. Her eyes were now blood red. "Am I beautiful now?" she asked in her monotone voice. "Yeah," I say, not slurring but trembling, but all tense started to fade away when she turned around and walked back down the darkened alleyway. Then she disappeared into the dark. I watched her disappear into the dark and started to speed walk the rest of the way home. The rest of the walk home was just a black memory, which told me it was definitely a hallucination. I never knew exactly why anyone would do that in a treating manner and not harm me on the spot. I opened the front door to my apartment, finally feeling warm. I shuffle myself inside, shut the door, and lock it. My hammered mind put the entire experience in the back of my head. I couldn't make it into my bedroom with the comfort of my bed, so I plopped myself on the couch. I grabbed the remote I left on the floor and turned on the TV. I passed out on the couch, having a dream about the occurrence I had with the woman, but in the dream, I was killed, which woke me up stunned. It was still dark outside, but the moon is now shining in my living room window, which told me the sun will rise. In the window, something passed by swiftly. It looked like the silhouette of a person, the silhouette of the woman. I get nervous, but before I could do anything, I heard a window shatter. I jolted bolt upright, looking for a broken window. The window of the kitchen next to the living room was shattered, but no woman. I get off the couch and immediately stand on my 2 feet looking around, looking for the woman. I felt a pair of arms wrap around my chest, and my head was pushed against the shoulder of the woman. "You said I was beautiful, so I want to make you beautiful," she said in her haunting, monotone voice. When I got a glimpse of her face, she looked terrifying. Her mouth was opened 6 times more than any human can open their mouth. Her eyes, now more bloodshot, her tongue now slapping my face. I screamed, which gave her the chance to shove her tailor shears in my mouth. She then clipped my mouth like hers, ever so slowly, which made me scream in agony and pain. When she finished, she threw me on the floor. "Look, now you're beautiful like me." Her monotone voice is now giving me chills up my spine. She throws her tailor shears, which poked into my abdomen. Her hand that holds the scissors started to pull the scissors up my stomach to my chest. It was like she had telekinesis, because when the scissors finished dragging through my torso, she retrieved them back into her hands. I woke up in my bed, sweating like I was drenched with a water hose. I sigh of relief. "It was just a dream," I happily say, placing my hand on my forehead. I was filled with delight that what happened never happened. I walk into the bar, which was serving a drink to their morning customers. "Hey dude, I'm here to receive my car and keys," I yelled, which made everyone and the bartender turn to me. Then everyone's jaw dropped to the floor, giving a shocked look. The bartender points at me and says, "Your mouth." Now I know that wasn't a hallucination. This is not my story, but my uncle's. The story's been passed around my family for some time now, but I thought I would post it on here to read other people's thoughts and opinions. This is a true story, according to my uncle. Years ago, my uncle, his wife, and all of their children were on a road trip to Pennsylvania. They were going to stay with a relative of ours for the weekend. My uncle was the one driving, and his wife was in the passenger seat. My aunt wasn't usually able to sleep in the car, so she was drifting in and out of sleep for the past hour or so. Their children were already fast asleep. It was late at night, and my uncle hadn't seen any other cars for a while. He saw a sign that said something along the lines of, Philadelphia, 100 miles. I can't recall the exact distance that I was told, but I do know they were probably a couple hours away from their destination. My uncle called the relative to let them know how far they were. As soon as he got off the phone, another car appeared in front of him. Naturally, he thought it was strange as he hadn't seen any cars for some time now. He was going to say something to his wife, but he did not want to wake or disturb her. He chalked it up to him being tired or just not paying attention. It was odd, but he continued driving anyway. He was driving with the car still in front of him for another 30 minutes or so. He looked to his right and saw a sign that said, Philadelphia, next right. My uncle knew immediately that something was wrong. He made the decision to ignore the sign. It did not make any sense that it would be the next right, when only 30 minutes ago, he was 100 miles away. At this point, his wife was awake, but just barely. He continued driving and saw that the car in front of him took the next exit. Knowing something was off, my uncle was curious, so he watched as the car drove off a cliff. He was stupefied. He asked his wife what the hell was that person thinking, and if they should pull over and call the cops. Only his wife responded with, "What car are you talking about?" My uncle didn't say anything, and continued driving to their destination. To this day, I am still scared of going on road trips late at night. I do not know what my uncle saw. My aunt did not see the car in front of them, and obviously did not see it driving off of a cliff. Why was my uncle the only one who saw it? Was my uncle just imagining the car and the sign? It was around 10 at night, and I had just gotten off of work. I wasn't tired since I had slept all day, and only had a 5-hour shift. It's like that on Wednesdays. It had been a while since the last time I went hunting, and I've been itching to do it, but I just never had the time. I loaded up my rifle in my truck, not really expecting to get anything, just love the smell and feel of the forest. It was dark out, so I brought some night vision binoculars. I made my way out to the woods, which was just across town, and hiked the rest of the way out to my usual hunting spot, where I also had built a platform in a tree to lay in while I hunt. To give you a picture of what I was looking at, there was a big open area in the middle of the forest with nothing but stumps and logs, because some trees had been cut down there. It was about the size of an acre, and was surrounded by trees, and I was in one of them. After about 20 minutes of sitting still and watching, I decided to eat the sandwich I'd packed, even though I planned to be there till midnight. I had barely even began to bite into the bread whenever I heard a loud moan out in the distance that echoed through the trees. I put down my sandwich and pulled out my binoculars. I scoped the area left and right, over and over again. Nothing. I decided to set one of the detachable opticals up on the scope of my rifle, which had already been mounted and weighted. I was hoping it was maybe a boar, or even better, a buck. I sat there with my finger hovering beside the trigger, scanning the area. I finally saw some movement from behind one of the logs. I focused my aim on the spot where I saw the movement. Then all of a sudden a deer ran up full sprint out into the open lining. Without even thinking, I fired 2 quick shots. Each one missed as I saw the dirt fly off the ground from the bullets. But before I took the 3rd shot, I hesitated. The buck was tripping while running like hell. It was running away from something. It still had a while to go before it crossed the area, so I did a quick scan, but I didn't see anything. When I turned my gun back over towards the deer, it had stumbled and fell all the way down. It was probably bitten or something because it was limping hard. That's why I kept tripping. However, as soon as I put my finger on the trigger, I saw something leap out from behind one of the logs and attack the deer. When I got a good look at it, my heart nearly sunk into my chest. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The thing was humanoid, but with long limbs where the elbows and knees would be were backwards. Its mouth was wide open, and it had long black hair on its head. The deer was still kicking for its life, but the thing had a firm grip on its neck. It maneuvered its long arms and legs around the deer kinda like a spider. Then it dropped its head onto the neck of the deer, where I could only assume it was biting it. The deer's kicks started to pace slower and slower till it eventually died. I had never felt so much fear. Everything was silent except for the crickets. I was just watching this thing eat a full-sized buck. I had to get out of there. I started packing all my expensive gear and grabbed my keys, but before I left, I took one last look at the field to make sure that it was still there. I wanted to throw up. The creature was lowered to the ground, kind of like a cat staring right into my scope. Beside it was the deer that looked like roadkill. I got a good look at its face. I saw 4 eyes and a mouth that could fit an entire tire in what was shaped into a smile. I left everything and just took my keys and ran for my life, pushing my way through the low-hanging branches and leaves. I heard the same moan from earlier, but louder. I practically slammed into the truck door, fumbling for my keys to unlock it. Off in the distance, I heard branches snapping and trees rustling. I unlocked my truck door, hopped in, and jammed my keys into the ignition. I threw the truck into drive and was about to slam my door and take off till I looked into the trees that were probably 20 feet from the road. There it was, staring at me. It was huge, even bigger than my truck. I just waited in shock. The only sound that could be heard was the engine rumbling. I slowly closed my door and kept my eyes on it. It wouldn't move. It could clearly tear a hole through my door and grab me, but nothing. I finally snapped to my senses and stomped on the gas. Through my rearview mirror, I could see it staring at me from the same spot. I never told anyone what happened, except for here. I don't think anyone would believe me anyway. All I can say now is I'm never hunting in those woods again. Y'all ever seen a Wiggleman? I'm not one for this ghost and goblin stuff. I don't know what else to call it. It's shaped like a person, stands on 2 legs and all, but it twitches and shakes when it walks, like it's tortured every step. It's almost like it's blurry from the shaking. Does that make sense? I've only seen it at my job, when I'm alone and the lights get turned out. I work in a garage. I've been here since I dropped out of high school in '73. It's harder now that most cars are diagnosed with computers. I have a hard time keeping a job that relies on the digital stuff. I just started at a new shop. We specialize in older vehicles. Feels like old times. It all seemed to be going smoothly for the first few months. Then my boss Randy gave me the keys and had me start locking up at the end of the day. That's when I noticed this wiggler moving around. I ain't seen nothing like it. Seems to have an aversion to lights. I only seen it after I shut the lights down. It shudders as it walks, shaking like a dog, shitting peach seeds. Like it's getting an electric shock, or almost like it's made from TV static. Fast, twitchy movements. I don't know how else to explain it. Can't see much in the way of details, like skin, or clothing, or nothing. But I can feel that it wants to hurt me. The damn thing is angry, and I can feel it in the air. So when I shut off the shop lights, I always spring to the office where the lights are still on. I feel like a damn fool. I'm too old to be afraid of the dark. This thing always rattles its way from the back of the shop. The thing ain't too fast, but I run anyways. There's a mess of storage and half-finished projects in the back. During the day, I rummaged around there thinking I'd find some hobo setup, some makeshift living space. You've heard the stories where some crazy person is living in an attic or a crawl space, and the owner doesn't know till it's too late. That's what I was expecting, but there was no sign of it. Just the normal crap and corruption to be expected. That's why I stopped thinking it's a person, and maybe something otherworldly is happening. I should mention that there's a large stain on the ceiling back there too. Like a large oil stain you'd find under an old truck, but on the ceiling, there's some black charcoal looking stuff below it. I don't know how someone could make a stain like that, so high. If you look at it in just the right manner, it almost looks like it has depth. Like one of those hologram stickers you'd get from a gumball machine as a kid. There's something wrong about it. It must just be weird lighting or something. I don't know if that stain has anything to do with this twitcher, or if I've fallen off my rocker. It does seem connected though. Last night, when I was closing up shop, I could feel the hatred in the air before I even went to switch off the lights. maybe all this paranormal stuff is getting to me. Either way, it was like there was a low hum oscillating in my ears, and the air felt thicker. Time moved like molasses. With the lights still on, I went to the back to make sure the air compressor was drained for the night, one of the normal closing duties. Felt the urge to run away, to get the fuck out of the shop as soon as I could, skip closing it all down. The compressor kicked on as I was getting closer to it. Not going to lie, it startled me a bit. The old thing is loud as hell. Can't hear nothing past the rumbling of that old machine. I'm still a good ways away when the dang lights shut off. The switch is at the other end of the shop. No one is there but me. I stopped like a brick wall just appeared in front of me. The air compressor's motor blaring in my ear, filling my head with lightning. The noise is the only thing I can sense while my eyes are adjusting to the darkness. My boots are made of lead and tarred to the floor. The damn compressor camouflaging any sounds. I can feel every muscle keeping me on my feet, feeling every breath that passes from my lungs into the darkness, every heartbeat claw and scratch another hole in my chest, feeling every second stretch like a rubber band and snap. And then the lights turn back on, just like that. No ceremony, although I would have thrown a parade for the occurrence. Pop. A deafening hiss from the old beast air compressor as its tank is finally full. I quickly look around and run to shut it off. I finish up the rest of the closing duties and start for the lights. I prepare myself the way I always do. A couple deep breaths and get ready to run to the office. The lights oasis. I flip the switch, and as I'm rushing to the office like a scared child, I see this chatter bastard close out of the corner of my eye. I don't know how it got so close. Usually it takes a minute or two for it to stagger its way to the front of the shop. Maybe it hid in the shadows, under a car. Well, the lights were out. Who knows? I don't know how this stuff works. All I know is it's less than a Buick's length away. I bolt to the office and slam the door as it clamors behind me. Safe, I assume, under the fluorescent lights. I was crouched under the window that overlooks the shop, catching my breath, wondering if I've gone crazy, and knowing I have to get up to leave, that I can't stay, that I should turn the lights off in the office before I do. But fuck that. The lights are staying on tonight. I slowly lifted my head up to peek out the window to make sure the coast was clear. The coast was clear as mud, just past where light from the office fades into the darkness of the shop. I could see this jolting demon pacing back and forth, like a tremoring tiger trapped in a cage, agonizing in its every movement. I watched for as long as I could bear, then ducked back down, fumbling for my keys with sweaty hands. I prepared for my escape. 6, maybe 7 good strides to the door. That's it. That's all I had to do for safety. Without checking to see where this convulsing monstrosity is, I take my chance and run for the door. Again, time turned to winter oil. Between strides, the lights fail me again. Last few feet in total darkness. I fling the door wide and slide out as fast as I can. Pivot to slam it shut. In the quick sliver before I do, I can see the rattler opening up the office door and heading for me. As soon as the door is sealed, I try to slip the keys in and lock it up, but the keys had other plans. They fell to the ground before I could lock it up. Knowing I only had a few moments before the shaker got to the door, I just ran. Not my proudest moment. I'm outside and I can see the electricity is out on the whole block. I jump into my pickup and back up onto the street to hightail it. As I switch from reverse into gear, I see the entrance to the shop office open up. Mr. Wiggles was out. I put it in gear and squeaked my tires. I let loose a monster. I called in sick today. Shameful, I know. I don't have it in me to close up shop again. Being the new guy, I know I'll have to. I don't want to lose this job. I finally got to wrench on cars for real, instead of being told how to fix them by a computer. Who knows where that demon made it to last night? Maybe the sun fried it up when it spit out light this morning. Hopefully. I guess I'll find out tomorrow. I can't call in sick forever. Hopefully Randy isn't too pissed about the front door being left unlocked. I guess it'd be a blessing in disguise if I did get fired. I wouldn't have to deal with this shaky bastard ever again. My name is Gary, and I've got a story about my time with the park rangers in Northern California, and what I believe to be a cryptid of some kind. I'll get right to it. It was December of last year when I was wandering the park, and suddenly I hear a meowing. I thought, stray cat, it happens, and continued my rounds thinking nothing else of it. A bit later in the day, I hear it again. At this point, I'm getting ready to clock out, and I'm doing what we at my park refer to as final rounds. This is the same sort of checking for homeless, garbage, cleanup, morning detail stuff, but you do it before the end of your shift as well. At first, I ignored the sound yet again. Then, I heard it once more. I decided I'd check now, and make sure that the cat in question was okay. I figured, at worst, it gets spooked and leaves, and I'll know it's clearly still fine as it's moving. As I came upon the source area of the sound though, I saw nothing. Figuring it was a stray cat that left to the sound of my footsteps, I proceeded to walk back toward the path I was working and scan for trash for a bit longer to kill the rest of my shift. It was about 10 minutes from quitting time when I heard a meowing again. I ignored it and it happened once more. I continued ignoring it and it happened again. I decided, what the hell, I'll give it one more check. So I climbed a short slope and looked for the sound. It was then I saw something that shocked me into freezing. Something standing on 2 feet and extremely muscular, covered in fur, stood in a clearing over the hill. It perked its ears and began to turn, at which point I skedaddled down the hill as quickly as possible. Upon doing so, I heard a massive roar. I about pissed myself as I got to the bottom of the slope and onto the trail and began sprinting. I heard another loud roar. It was loud enough that I felt the trees around the trail shake, and I had to clutch my ears to soften the sound. I ran and ran and ran some more, and as I looked up, I could see something huge moving through the trees as well. Its fur was all black, and it shook the trees above the trail. I tried to get a better view when it suddenly turned and vanished into the forest. I was perplexed by this, but thankful as it appeared to no longer be pursuing me. As I'm getting closer to the beginning of the trail, and where our station is, I suddenly hear the massive pounding of the ground, and see the trees shaking again. I'm about to run when this thing leaps from the slopes and lands in front of me. I fall in shock and terror, thinking it's the end of me. This thing has to stand at least 12 to 13 feet tall, and had all black fur. Its eyes were white, and it looked a bit like a wolf. It appeared to sniff the air and look around, but it quickly darted into the woods upon the sound of gunfire. One of my coworkers fired a warning shot off into the air, and this thing simply ran into the woods. I never saw the thing again. I'm not even sure what it was. It didn't appear to see me while it sniffled around. That is to say, I think it may have been blind. I might have thought dogman, but everything I've heard of those they can see. I'm not sure what it was, but it wasn't natural, and it certainly was not human. My grandfather has owned his 100-acre hunting property in northern Michigan for close to 30 years now, and my family uses it from everything from family reunions to 4th of July celebrations, a shooting range, and of course, hunting. It's mostly swamp but has large patches of dry ground, enough to ride quads and have cookouts in the center of the small camp we had set up. Since before I was even old enough to carry a gun, I would go out with my dad on chilly fall mornings and just sit in silence, watching the woods around me with saucered eyes, waiting to catch a glimpse of brown fur or dull white antlers moving through the brush. When I was 15, my father finally agreed that I was old enough to find my own hunting spot and hunt on my own, and I picked a spot in the far back corner of the property, a small piece of high ground surrounded by thick, thorn-filled swamp. Setting up my stand in an old, strong white pine, I had a view of the small clearing and could see through the branches of the surrounding trees far into the swamp around me. Being in the middle of nowhere, the property didn't have many neighbors, save for a middle-aged man with a drinking problem that lived across the street that kept an eye on the place while we weren't there, and an old man that owned a cattle farm behind the property. The man across the street was Dan, and was a nice enough guy, as long as you caught him before he hit the halfway mark on his daily bottle of rum. But I always got uneasy when talking to the farmer from the cattle farm. He seemed okay. No reason outright not to like him, but he was quiet, With a pursed look on his face at all times. His visits to the property were usually brief, just to inform us about repairs along our shared fence, or to come asking if we had seen a cow that had gotten out. At the edge of one of his pastures, 100 yards or so from his tree line, was a small building, no bigger than a storage shed, with a single window opposite side on the wall of the door, facing the trees. In and of itself, this isn't particularly unusual, except for the strange patterns painted on it. Hieroglyph-looking markings mixed with geometric shapes and surrounded with stunted apple trees, hunched stumps, and gnarled branches poking out of the otherwise empty field. During one of his visits, I asked him about it, and what he was doing there so late at night, as the light from the window could be seen from the edge of our property long after dark. I didn't ask to be nosy, just trying to make conversation and get to know him better, and even tried to ask in a somewhat joking tone. I still remember his voice, deep and rough, lips barely moving as the words slipped through his beard. Just making sure this place stays safe. Laughing, I asked what he meant. You never know what's out there. This was a few years ago. I'm 23 now, and this past summer my grandfather got a call from Dan, saying the old farmer had died. Police had found him on his bed, holding a small leather book filled with ramblings and symbols. Everybody marked it up to a poor old man losing his mind after living alone for so many years. Yesterday, I decided I would go out hunting. And being early bow season, I was the first one since the old man had passed to visit the hunting property. I got here last night, and after unlocking the outhouse, checking the trail cam, and setting up my bed in the small, one-room cabin, I walked to the edge of the property, looking out over the empty pastures and the setting sun, and gaze falling on the small shed. The window dark for the first time I can remember. I went to bed early. I always have trouble getting up early, and needed the sleep if I wanted to be in the stand before the deer started to move. I woke once in the night to pee, and standing out in the cold October air, I felt uneasy. The woods were completely silent. No owls, no barking of coyotes, no crickets. I quickly finished my business and returned to my bed. I woke this morning, made some eggs and toast, packed my lunch in my hunting pack, and walked out to my stand. Cutting through the farm pastures, I wouldn't have to trudge through the swamp, not like the farmer would mind anymore. I situated myself in a seat high above the ground and poured some coffee from the thermos as I scanned the still dark forest. Through the silhouetted branches, back in the swamp I caught quick movement, just for a moment, darting behind some scrub brush, much too fast to be a deer, and not making any noise. Damn squirrels. Then I realized it wasn't just that the animal in the swamp didn't make any noise. Nothing was making noise. No birds, no squirrels, no wind. The air hung, stagnant. The cold from my breath slowly rising straight up as it dissipated. The same feeling of unease crept over me, raising the skin buried beneath my warm clothing. I sat in silence as the sun rose and began to bathe everything in light. I realized I was holding my coffee, and I had been staring at the same place I had seen the movement. With the sun came the birds, slowly growing into a symphony. The rest of the morning went uneventfully. Seeing nothing more than a red-headed woodpecker doing its best to give itself a concussion and a raccoon, slowly waddling back to its hollow log somewhere. Quietly ate my lunch, scanning for movement and listening for the distinct sound of hesitant hooves over dead leaves. As the sun moved overhead and began to set, I became more focused. Something had to be making its way toward me. I could feel it. As dusk lengthened the shadows, I heard cows coming from the fields behind me. Somebody must have taken over looking after the cows in the absence of the farmer. Crimson light from the sunset turned to darkness. Disappointed at the lack of deer, I climbed down and switched on my headlamp. Not wanting to disturb the cows, I bit the bullet, and elected to cut through the swamp back to camp. It was a more direct route anyway. As I reached the end of the brush, something stopped me from going in. That feeling of uneasiness, when something isn't right but you can't figure out what. I brushed it off, fed up with this weird feeling that I didn't see any deer, and the fact I had to go through this damn swamp. As I pushed my way through the brush, dark water swirling around just inches below the top of my boots, branches slapping across my face, I heard a rustle behind me. I spun, the small cone of light from my headlamp doing little to illuminate more than a few feet into the bushes. Or did the noise come from my left? I slowly turned, straining my ears to see past the light into the darkness. I realized again, the woods had fallen silent. I couldn't even hear the cows that were out less than an hour before. Only the sounds of my short breaths and pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. It was then that I remembered the words that my father had said once, in my first time out hunting with him. Deer don't come out when the woods is quiet. When everything goes silent, not even the birds are singing. It means a predator is near. This was the second night the woods had fallen completely silent around me. Was something following me? Another noise spun me around, and the beam of my light caught movement of something disappearing into a thicket. My breathing turned panicked, my heart hitting the inside of my ribs like a hammer. I moved quickly. Splashes of cold, murky water jumped over the sides of my boots, chilling my legs and soaking my feet. The polished wooden handle of my hunting knife grew slick with the sweat from my palm. Another noise, closer this time. Did it come from the right or from behind me? The old farmer's words echoed in my head, just making sure this place stays safe. My pace quickened even more. I was all but running. A bundle of thorn bushes smacked against my right side, scratching down my face and piercing my right hand. I yelped and dropped the knife into the muddy water. I looked back to try and find it when another noise erupted from the brush. You never know what's out there. Fuck it. Run. The noises were definitely closer. Whatever was chasing me was easily keeping up, almost silently. I heard a rustle and looked up to see a shadow dart from the light, leaving the tree branch it was on gently bouncing. Just making sure this place stays safe. I burst from the swamp onto dry land and forced my waterlogged feet to move faster. A stick broke behind me. I whirled around to reveal nothing, as leaves crunched from the direction I was just going. The dimming light from my headlamp shone on nothing but brown leaves, settling back to the ground. You never know what's out there. Run. The bouncing light caught something in the clearing ahead. The cabin. The sounds emanating from whatever was chasing me grew more rapid. First above me, then behind, back to overhead. Just making sure this place stays safe. I reached the cabin door, slamming the heavy oak door behind me and locking the deadbolt. The blood from my hand had made my palms sticky. I leapt to the gas lamp at the peak of the ceiling, turned the knob to open the propane line, and clicked my lighter. The lamp stayed dark. A thunderous noise came from the front door as something heavy hurled itself at it. I flicked the lighter again. The black charred glass stared back at me mockingly. The door shuddered as it was slammed into again. I sprung to the propane tank and shook it. Empty. The door rattled again, this time accompanied by the faint sounds of wood beginning to splinter. I slowly sank to the floor, knocking an arrow to my bowstring. Whatever was out there, I had one chance at it, before it would be on top of me. I trained my dying headlamp on the door. The door heaved, more splintering. The deadbolt was beginning to pull from its screws. You never know what's out there. Another late night at the Little Bottle-O, and I'm standing here zoning out to the hum of the shitty old neon sign that hangs out in front of the place. The store has a nice, grungy feel to it. It's dimly lit, and you can hear dogs barking maniacally in the distance. I mean, Christ, what an atmosphere. I often wonder why I still work in a place like this. And I suppose I just stay because I'm used to it. I often feel like some sort of a drug dealer for the government. Boy, oh boy. I think anyone would be shocked by the sort of people that come through these parts. I look up to the clock on the wall, 10:37 p.m. What a nice sight to see. At 11 p.m., I can lock the bloody place up, give the floor a quick mop, and then I can get the fuck out of here. There's always one customer though, every single night, that just has to sneak right on in just before closing time to buy something. I get that people aren't psychic, but by around 9 p.m., I'm already sick to death of serving the inebriated clopheads that wander in. Customers are just the last thing I want to be dealing with in the midst of the evening. That neon light that glows in a nice radiant blue against the pavement out front of the shop serves as my indicator of an incoming drunkard. I can always spot their silhouettes stumbling towards the shop door, and I hastily summon up a smile to greet them. It's a load of BS on my part though, of course. I really couldn't be asked to greet some drunk all nice and cheerfully. But the last thing you want to do is piss off some drunk, and I guess my smiles keep the manager happy. You've just gotta do what you've gotta do. Just my luck. Here I am checking stock, and out of the corner of my eye there's a silhouette. The shadowy figure disappears quickly, and I'm met with some bearded bum in a tattered old overcoat, wandering in through the entrance. He looks out of his damn mind. He's pacing around the store, muttering to himself. I speak up. Anything I can help you with, sir? No reply. He looks as though he is composing himself. He's taking long, drawn-out breaths. Now, finally he too speaks up. Mind if I have a quick look around the cooler room? Sure thing, man. Take your time. I respond belatedly. For my own sake, I really hope this bloke hurries up and gets whatever it is he wants. I can't help but notice the way he keeps checking over his shoulder as he walks into the cooler room. The guy seems real paranoid, just real on edge. Time keeps moving forward. The hum of the neon sign can only keep me occupied for so long. I look up at the clock. 11:04 p.m. Damn, I really gotta close shop. I'll give the guy a few more minutes max. I sigh out of frustration and look to the neon light. That's strange. An idle shadow figure is there in the light of the neon. I suppose it could just be someone waiting out front, but something about their figure irks me. Its arms are out to its sides, fingers spread, and its fingers are long, head tilted, with its knees bent like it's waiting to pounce. What in the hell? I've seen one too many horror movies. There's no way I'm going outside to look at whoever or whatever this is. It must just be someone that's completely off their face. Fuck's sake. I just want to go home now, and this guy is still in the cooler room. I want to go back and check on the guy, but that shadowy figure is seriously freaking me out. Its fingers are moving, bending about strangely. Could this just be someone waiting to play a joke on the guy? Screw it. I go to walk into the cooler room and suddenly the constant droning sound of the neon sign stops. I turn back around, and I can just barely see the pavement outside the front of the store's glass door. No more shadowy figure. But what if it's still there? How could I tell now? Could still be standing there out of my sight. Is he gone? I hear a voice say from behind me. Excuse me? I say, stammering as I turn around to face the bum. Terror is strewn across his face. I was being followed by someone, I swear it. Someone trying to mug me, I think. Couldn't tell you what he wanted, really. Did you see him? He says, talking at 1,000,000 miles per second. This guy is clearly some sort of a tweaker. No normal person's jaw smacks around like that while they speak. I saw a shadow out front, but the light went out. I think you should stay here. We should probably call the police. I responded. Police? Nah, no police. No way. I've been there a damn near half hour. If that fella wants something from me, he can come get it. The bum says. He looks pissed now, addled and irritated. Hey, look man, I really think you should hang tight. Before I could even finish, he had made his way out of the entrance. His figure disappeared into the night. Just moments after he left, the neon sign began to flicker. The hum droned in and out, and in the short bursts of light I could see it. The thing was still there, and it was moving. Its shadow moved, and for a moment I could see it. It was a split second, but it felt like an eternity. Gray with black eyes, long, thin limbs. Its legs stretched unnaturally far, and in a singular moment under the neon light, I was able to gaze upon it. Then it was gone. The light continued to flicker for a few moments more, and it was back on as normal. I was riddled with fear. I didn't even know where the rest of the night went. In some confused stupor, I closed as usual and wandered home. I remained in this state of paranoia for days. I was finally brought back to reality by the headlines of all the papers. The murders continue. More homeless found dead. I flickered through the pages, and there he was. Raggedy beard and all. Pictured, Mark Rylan has been missing since October 14th, If you have any information, please contact authorities. I'm a certified coroner who works with a very skilled team of biohazard cleaners and mortuary assistants. My crew is usually called in after the police have ruled the cause of death as natural, accidental, or suicide. Anything else is handled by an unaffiliated crew. As you'd expect, I've seen my fair share of gruesome and harrowing things in my line of work. The first thing that comes to mind is a case I took on in early June of last year. An elderly man had slipped in the bathtub and split a nice curve open in his head. He tripped and ironically brained himself on one of the metal handrails he had installed in the bathroom to keep him from slipping. It was a clean split from the frontal bone to the occipital bone. He was frozen in a prone position with blood bubbling up like snot from a fancy new smile opened up on his scalp. The faucet kept filling and the water kept rising at a snail's pace, overtaking the limescale rings in the tub one by one. He struggled to pull his head above the water's surface for minutes. If only that fresh new ravine in the back of his head could have sucked air down into his lungs. Maybe then he'd had lived to take another bath. But that story ends exactly how you'd imagine it did, with a wrinkled old corpse with skin stained rose black, laying face down in an overflowing tub of blood water. That was the worst case I'd ever seen. Until last week when I took a call from dispatch about an apparent suicide the police had just finished picking the bone to clean on. The report said it was a 24-year-old Caucasian female. She was carrying along just fine in her second trimester when she decided to slit her own throat in the middle of the living room after the father unceremoniously decided to step out of the picture. We arrived in two sleek white vans, one loaded up with cleaning supplies and the other equipped to load corpses in and then them out. The lawn was peppered with strips of police tape and the occasional disposable latex glove. Police are often sloppy at cleanup in my experience. A patrol car across the street that was monitoring the house, waiting for our arrival, gave us a veiled wave and then sped off down the street. The home oozed out ominousness like an on-scene gas leak. The front door gave a shrill protest as it eased open. Immediately, I felt dread closing around me like a weighted blanket. There she was, laying face up on a lattice blue rug. Her skin was a sickly pallor of muted, while interrupted by the sleek black tangled of her hair and the blotches of carmine blood pooled around her neck and dried in the deep curves of her collarbones. Her belly was horribly distended, bubbled out by rising bloat and the cold fetus inside her womb. The expressiveness waning in the milky crescents of her eyes sent a coarse shiver down my spine, but we had a job to do. And so, we got to work, as respectfully as we could. We pulled a black body bag around the rigor mortis wooden framework of her body. Me and my assistant Mike then shifted her into the gurney and wheeled her out to the van. As we pulled up to the back of the van, from behind our lead biohazard cleaner Kai came huffing out of the building after us. He was dressed in the usual neon yellow jumpsuit, and I could see the ripe flecks of an islander muscles beneath the plastic. Sweat glistened balmy and dripping from the bow of his massive forehead. "So, you guys are just gonna leave the body back there or what? Where are you two going?" I looked at Kai with a skeptical bewilderment, and rolling my eyes, I unzipped the body bag so Kai could see the gruesome contents within. As soon as I opened the bag, the strong hinted outline of her body dissolved, and the bag settled down flat. "What the fuck, Kai? Is this some sort of a sick joke?" I asked impatiently. A look of terror glazed across the murky brown turbulence of his eyes, and instantly I knew it was not a joke. A wave of nausea overtook me, and I felt an army of invisible ants prickle up across my skin, on my back. The two of us ran back into the building with Mike following close behind us in his hooded jumpsuit. We reached the family room, and there she was, lying perfectly posed on the floor, in the exact same position we'd found her in. I nearly vomited that morning's breakfast all over the hardwood next to the rug. "Go get the gurney now." Mike rushed out. Kai stared down at the corpse with a wrinkle of unease settled on his brow. I watched him switching his balance from foot to foot with an uneasy, awkward gait. It terrified me to see this tank of a man so offset. A minute later, I heard the gurney's wheels thumping determinedly back up the porch steps. We once again loaded her inside the body bag, dragged the gurney over, and heaved her onto it. This time, I cinched her body in with the heavy straps dangling off the side of the gurney, and I buckled her in. I pulled them so tight, I heard the soft tendons and ribs beneath the woman's chest twist and then crack. We wheeled her out towards the van once more. I nodded towards Kai and motioned for him to carefully wash the pool of blood on the rug. We had gotten only as far as the sidewalk when Kai started screaming. I quickly unzipped the top corner of the bag, and the second I had done so, it deflated like a balloon. We relayed back inside to find Kai mumbling in Tongan. The man must have weighed 300 odd pounds, and yet there he was, sitting with his ass to the floor, his face racked with affliction. His thick sausage fingers were clutched around a handful of his shirt fabric. He'd peeled his body out of the top half of the jumpsuit, which bundled around his hips. He was soaked with sweat. I could hear the convulsive manner of his breathing, and the panic in his eyes reminded me of the time I accidentally swallowed a marble as a child. I rushed over to Kai, sidestepping the corpse, which was back in her usual position in the middle of the floor. Something caught my eye at a passing glance. Was that a grin I saw on her face? Kai's skin was quickly blotching with purple spots beneath the crooks of his eyes, which looked swollen near to bursting right out of his skull. Mike rushed in, and we took the wide-set man under our arms and dragged him out of the house. It took all the effort we could muster, but we wrangled him out onto the front lawn. "Call a fucking ambulance, Mike." Mike rushed away to retrieve his cell phone, and I watched two little rivulets of blood trace down the soft corners of Kai's tear ducts. All at once, he convulsed, croaked, and then he fell still. I caught up with Mike and pulled him towards the lawn by the sleeve of his jumper. I was planning on just loading Kai up into the van to drive him myself to the emergency room, but when I turned around, Kai was gone. I took a few hesitant steps towards the door, but was stopped dead in my tracks. The woman's body was laid in the exact same manner it was in before, with one obvious exception. Her mouth was now curled into a sinister grin wide enough to show her rows of faded tombstone teeth. My eyes diverted to her side, and I saw it then. Propped against the wall, just a few feet from her, was Kai, rigid, dead, and still weeping blood from his eyes. It was my mom who first insisted there was something special about me. From a very young age, there were things I would say to her that, by all reasonable explanations, I shouldn't have been able to know. I asked her if we could go blueberry picking like her and Grandpa. I begged her to let me go see his toy planes. Whenever my uncle came over, she insisted to him that she'd never told me about the model plane collection, or their summers in the fields, or any number of things I'd casually mentioned over the years. There were no pictures or anything in the house that would hint at these moments, saved only in memory. He wasn't easily convinced, but I hadn't yet learned to keep my mouth shut, and she appeared to made some compelling arguments. So before I was even a teenager, they were both in agreement. It was their belief that I was in some way the reincarnation of my late grandfather. After all, how else could I know so much about their own childhoods? Of course, my mother was especially close to him, which seemed to explain why I could recall more about her past with him than with my uncle. At a certain point, I was bringing up details about the two of them which even she didn't seem to remember. Of course, I wasn't my dead grandfather. I started to catch on to at least that much at school. I'd seemed to know things about my teacher and the kids in my class, things I shouldn't be able to know, but my mom was so happy. She had missed my grandfather so much. Even as a kid, I knew if I told her about it, she would figure out exactly what I had, and she'd be devastated. So, I kept quiet. It worked out for both of us. I'd only tell her things I knew about my grandfather, and she held on to that connection to him. I still look back fondly on those early days, before things began to fall apart. She was diagnosed with dementia when I was in my teens. She'd been forgetful before, but that's the only way I ever remembered her. It was my uncle who convinced her to see a doctor. Maybe it was because he was an adult that allowed him to notice before I did, or because the infrequent visits made a gradual process more obvious. In hindsight, I should have figured this all out sooner. I wanted everything to stay the way it was, so I kept myself ignorant. I didn't think it all through. What she had wasn't a clear-cut diagnosis. The doctors didn't know precisely what was happening to her. She had day-to-day difficulties, but her long-term memory suffered the most. I could see that treasured relationship with my grandfather she once reminisced about start to wane. It hurt even more because I knew how much it had mattered to her. As this ability I had developed, I'd almost felt like I had been there with them at times. But he slowly lost a spatial place in her heart. He mattered less and less, until by the time I was finishing high school, she had a hard time even remembering his name. Leaving to attend university was a tough decision. I knew she'd need someone to take care of her before long, but my uncle insisted he'd check up on her regularly, and make sure she was properly taken care of if things grew worse. So, I drove 1,400 kilometers away. This is where I started doubting that I really had any sort of gift at all. The only people who were convinced of my abilities were two direct members of my own family, people with a vested interest in that belief. It seemed to click in my head. She had trouble remembering things. Maybe that's where it all began. Maybe she told me about the blueberries and the plains, and entirely forgot. Then when I brought them up, of course she'd be shocked. It's not like I had a clear memory of how the events went down myself. I was just a little kid. After she grasped onto her beliefs, I could have picked up on so many other things through the memories she insisted on reliving with me. Maybe I'd sold myself on the delusion enough to fabricate the events in my own imagination. I mean, even the things I seemed to just know about the people around me were never things that I was able to independently verify the validity of. Plenty of crazy people think they have superpowers, right? So I decided I would remain skeptical until I was able to properly test to see if this was all real. I picked up surprisingly little information about people around me on campus. It was a crowded place. There were way more people than I was used to. That made it all the stranger that I was getting close to nothing from them. Even when I did manage to glean something from passing acquaintances, there wasn't much opportunity to capitalize on the chance. You don't just walk up to a near stranger and ask them if they did, in fact, pee themselves in front of their entire class in 4th grade. A few months passed, and my hope of properly testing to see if I was a mind reader began to dwindle. Even worse, I wasn't feeling at all like my usual self. I had little to no appetite. I was usually pretty active and stayed fit, and I'd probably lost about 15 pounds just in muscle. Honestly, I was having a tough time even finding motivation to get up most mornings, though none of that worried me nearly as much as the final symptom. I was starting to forget things. It started with my grades slipping. Studying just didn't seem to be as effective. I'd even taken up one of my mom's old habits of leaving sticky notes for myself. I was a mess, and the thought that my mother's condition was heritable was constantly looming over me. My supposed ability was almost at a standstill. It was only ever giving me occasional memories of my father, or at least that's who I guessed the man to be. I'd never met him. The memories weren't happy. At the time, I considered it another possible delusion. I called my uncle at one point to ask him if he'd ever gone on a boating trip in the lake outside town and caught a fish the span of his arms. If I had a gift, this was one memory I was certain it had given me from his childhood. I'd held on to it for years since it first appeared in my mind. I remembered how proud he felt. He said he didn't recall anything like that. The images that did still appear to me took on a different shape. A girl in a mirror, a smell, something darker, a few somethings. I wrote them down in my journal, but otherwise dismissed them. Chloe approached me first at a party. I didn't figure out until later that it was her who included me in on the online invite. Figures. I didn't really have friends at the time. We got to talking, and had a lot in common. Apparently we even shared a few classes. Not much time passed before we started studying together. She helped me get my grades up. I finally was able to find the energy I needed to make it through the day. My mind cleared up. She was someone I really felt I could talk to. We got to sharing stories, and I opened up to her about my situation back home. I told her about how my mom was still deteriorating, how every time we talked on the phone, she'd say she was thinking about me, and how I'd always try to make my voice sound happier through the tears, because every call, I worried that would be the last time she'd say it. I even told her about what my family believed about me. Of course I left out some details. I proposed my theory of a rational explanation. I didn't tell her I at any point actually thought there was something special about me. She was sympathetic. Her own past was less paranormal, but not less painful. I'd rather not publicize her past to the internet. I probably wouldn't be mentioning it at all if it weren't for something strange. Everything she told me matched closely what I'd written in my journal right before we'd met. We spent a lot of our time together after that. It transitioned into dating. She always said it was like having a weight lifted off her shoulders when we were together. That's about when I began to learn how my powers actually worked. I'd stopped lurking on the internet and began building an online presence. A small blog, really small, but it revealed something. I gave weekly tips on surviving university life, with personal experiences sprinkled in. As the page views increased, I'd start seeing memories. Memories of places I'd never been, people completely unfamiliar. Some would be one-time events, but there were others whose memories I'd regularly see. My followers. Felt good. I played around with the format for a while before the blog lost traction, and the memories trickled to a halt. Thought I was onto something, so I didn't give up. My next project was a fan fiction, which actually got decently popular through Tumblr. Not a single memory resulted. What followed were a flurry of tests, first online, then in real life. I started figuring out the rules. It was based on connection. It worked on my mother's memories, my uncles, and people at my school as a kid. It worked on Chloe, on friends, and even people through the internet. It didn't work on people who didn't know me, or know of me. Not the strangers on campus, or the people reading my fanfic. There's been a knot in my stomach ever since I realized it'll continue to work on my mom, as long as she can still remember who I am. I'm not a mind reader. I'm a mind stealer. The memories I take, I can't give back. The more someone gets to know me, the more I can take. So far for Chloe, that's been to her advantage. But I can't stay with her. I can't let her lose everything, but I also can't leave her quite yet. Why? Because there's another rule. When I'm not taking enough memories, I start deteriorating. But I came up with a plan, and I thank you so much for your participation, because now you know more about me than I've ever told anyone. You won't realize the memories going missing at first. How could you? It'll be like they never existed. You might have similar ones to fill the gaps. I hope you do. I really hope you remember me.